Now, their ideas. What is the basis of this movement? Well, first of all, the minimalist artists wanted to allow the viewer an immediate, purely visual response and let them experience all the more strongly the pure qualities of color, form, space, and materials. So if you have nothing else to focus on, you don't have sort of the artist's hand to focus on, then you're left to deal with those pure qualities of art, or what the minimalists saw as those pure qualities of art: color, form, space, and material. Minimalism also sought to demystify art, to reveal its most fundamental character. The medium and materials of the work were its reality, and that was what the artists wanted to portray. The concept, or this concept, of pure aestheticism was highly revolutionary at the time. They are not trying to get across an idea to anyone else. This is purely an aesthetic design movement. After all, when we strip away a lot of detail, you are left with composition. And if there's a problem with the composition, it's going to be obvious. So, as an example, think of the Sistine Chapel ceiling. If Michelangelo messes up a finger on the right hand of one of those 300 figures, more than likely, unless BuzzFeed does an article about it, no one's going to notice. There's so much to look at. But now imagine that you create the Apple logo. If any element there is off, any element of design, the color, the form, the placement of the elements, then it's going to be really obvious that something has gone wrong. And that's kind of what minimalism is getting at, focusing on the aesthetic, focusing on the composition and the form rather than complexity. And when you do that, there's nowhere to hide should something go wrong. Now, in order to achieve this, they attempted to remove all suggestion of self-expression from the artwork. So, they're going to do things like try and eliminate ideas of composition, although of course you can't entirely, because we know at an intellectual level that someone organized this piece. They're going to eliminate complexity of form. They're going to eliminate themes, sort of overarching themes. They're going to eliminate metaphorical associations, symbolisms, and suggestions of spiritual transcendence. They're also going to remove representation or reference or association. This is to make it more universally accepted. So someone from China or Sri Lanka or Africa or Europe will read it in a similar way, or at least have the same starting information. They're going to eliminate social comment and elements of traditional work, as well as any other sign of personal expression from the artist. So, from then on, all choices stem from the intention of giving the work a literal presence. We'll see the use of unitary, geometric forms as they could be mistaken for representations of the external world, or they could not be mistaken for representations of the external world, nor for the narrative of a story. When you look at a cube like we see on the screen, you're not going to try and read a religious metaphor into it, for example. Instead, you look at it as a box on the floor and you explore it that way. It's bringing you back to a more primitive, more basic level in terms of your interaction with art. Their use of monochromatic palettes of primary colors will be necessary because they see this as the most basic color. They don't use color to express feeling or mood, but it's simply to delineate space when they do use it. They will use plain, industrial, factory-made, or store-bought, mass-produced materials, as these underscore the absence of the artist's individual mark. If they aren't buying something in or mass-producing it, what they will frequently do is work with a manufacturer to use their materials and their techniques to put these pieces together. So when we see these mirrored boxes, for example, these look like manufactured boxes, like something you could buy at IKEA. And they're meant to, because in doing so, it removes any personalization that you would otherwise have. We're always looking for one of those cut lines, for example, to be a little off. And then we can read into it. We can jump into it and say, see, the artist meant this. Minimalism, we can't, because the artist has removed all of that. So now it's your own interpretation of a mirrored box. And how do you handle that? And what does it pull out? The minimalist artist created objects that often blurred the boundaries between painting and sculpture. So we're going to see a lot of different pieces. These are all minimalist pieces. And when you look at them, a lot of students will look at them and say, well, heck, I could have done that. But again, we get to the same issue that we had in abstract expressionism. First, you weren't the first to do it. And secondly, and more importantly, in the 1960s and 70s, this speaks to the society. Because minimalism requires people to explore their brain. And by removing information from the equation, information that we would have in a Rothko color painting, because he chose the colors, or that we would have in a Pollock gestural painting, that's all gone. There's nothing to read into from the artist. All you're left with is your own thoughts. We can't interpret that at sort of a larger institutional level. So it's perfect for the 60s and 70s, which were all about individualization and sort of freedom for the individual to think for themselves, etc. So minimalism really speaks to that. And that is why we're talking about in an art history class.